Good morning, Charlotte. We're gonna have the best time this morning. It's great to see so many friendly faces. I'm Meredith Crimmins, Advertising Director with The Hill. On behalf of everyone at The Hill, I can't say how happy we are to be here in Charlotte, and we cannot wait to return this summer for the convention. Thank you all for joining us on the second installment of the Building the Dream series. Charlotte is our second stop on a 3-cities tour. We started in Minneapolis in November, and our next stop will be Milwaukee this April. Before I get underway, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our underwriter, the National Association of Home Builders. To all of those NAHB folks in the room and those watching online, thank you for your partnership and support. Rising home prices, lending restrictions, stagnant wages, and a growing burden of debt have made home ownership financially unattainable for many prospective buyers. Cities across the country, including ones as vibrant as Charlotte, continue to struggle with how to open the door to home ownership to more of the residents while ensuring sound fiscal policies and practices. Charlotte is on the front lines of the national housing affordability crisis, and according to the most recent data, more than a third of Charlotte households are cost burdened, meaning they spend more than half their income on housing. And at the same time, an estimated 34,000 below market value units are needed to meet the needs of Charlottans. This morning, we'll hear from leaders who are working to tackle these issues across all levels of government, as well as the private sector. First, a few housekeeping notes. In addition to our audience here at the beautiful Mint Museum, we're also live streaming on thehill.com, as well as the Hill's Facebook page. Please keep your phones on silent throughout the program, but please, we encourage you to participate in the conversation online. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at The Hill Events, and join the conversation using the hashtag #TheHillBuildingTheDream. We'll be taking questions from the audience during the program, so please be on the lookout for handheld mics. And finally, you'll receive a survey following the conclusion of today's events. We are always eager to hear how we can make our events more dynamic, so your feedback on today's program is more than welcome. With that, let's get things started. All right, please join me in welcoming to the stage a familiar face, Charlotte Mayor Vi Lyles. Elected to lead the Queen City in 2017, Mayor is the latest title and Ms. Lyles' more than 30-year resume working for the City of Charlotte. Madam Mayor, welcome. Great to have you with us this morning. And U.S. Congresswoman Alma Adams. Congresswoman Adams is currently serving in her 3rd term in Congress, representing North Carolina's 12th Congressional District, which spans the City of Charlotte and parts of Mecklenburg County. Congresswoman, thank you for joining us. Joining the mayor and congresswoman on stage is Steve Clemons, the Hill's editor-at-large. Steve,
good morning, everyone.
Floor is yours.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, everybody. I think the lesson, the mental note about today is that just before all of our events, announce a major snowstorm is on the way, and folks will show up. Great to be with all of you to talk about a consequential conversation. It's a great pleasure for the Hill to be down here. We're going to be back down here, as we will also be in Milwaukee for both the Democratic and the GOP conventions in both cities. So if this is any sign of the enthusiasm we're going to get then. But I do think that it is important to mention the convention that will be here in August, because I hope that today's topic is one that gets some attention when that convention is down here. So Mayor, let me ask you, a question to start this off. I've been trying to think about this question of home affordability, healthy communities, inclusion, getting the equation right, and just how you move from where we are today into a very different space. And you've been at this for a long time. And I'm interested in, who do you think the villains in the story are?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Let's start off with something very small, like let's go back to, slavery, and then let's get to the Civil War, and then Reconstruction, and then Jim Crow. And then I think we can probably start having a really honest conversation. Many of you have heard me tell the story that my dad fought in the war, and he came home, and the GI Bill had been passed. And there are 3 provisions in the GI Bill. You could get a scholarship for college, you could buy a house, you get a job preference. But there was a deal between the North and the Southern senators to say, well, we don't want these African-American soldiers to come back to their homes and be able to buy a home, and certainly not go to the same colleges that we're going to. So African-Americans in the war, when you could come in to buy a home now that would have been $40,000 and it's probably worth $350 now. You could have sent your kids to school with home equity and all of those kinds of things. They locked out people of color. And so that's really, I think, the thing that we start with, to recognize the history of redlining, to recognize the history of exclusion. So where does that bring us today? We have to start talking about it. The best arm for, or the best way to be armed for change is to understand why change is needed.
Right.
And the laws that we all purport to, make for everyone weren't really made for everyone. And so that's how you start to talk about and own your history and begin to change it and say, there is a reason that there are a number of people in this community that cannot afford a place to live. And it didn't just happen because of them.
Right.
And so affordability today, for me, is actually around the idea of equity in a community. If we are truly going to be a diverse and welcoming community, we have to deal with the people that have helped us get here, but are not included in housing opportunities. And that's where our city has really begun to have the discussion.
How does your city begin to move the needle on the issue you just raised, which is, one of financial equity, financial stakeholding, and a lot of folks are coming to the bar at a different place. What are the things you think both the city or the private sector or public-private partnerships can do to get some of those financial roadblocks removed?
Well, one of the very first things that I think about is the level of confidence we have to have in the community to understand that we're going to make this change. And so we have been doing small steps, $10, $5, $15 million around affordability, matching it with the federal funds from the Community Development Block Grant. But that wasn't really moving the needle. So we had to step up in another major way and say something that had meaning and actually put your money where your mouth is. Kind of that's the deal. We said that we believe that people ought to be able to work in the city, ought to be able to live in the city. So we put $50 million on the ballot. Thank you for all of you that really helped make that pass at 69% of the voter approval. But then we went to the private sector and we said, we need your help because this problem is actually a crisis, and all of us know that. And we needed to do something immediately to gain confidence that we would do that. And we did that with $100 million. We've got 1,800 units under construction, almost 2,000 right now, for affordability that's under 80%, but requires 20% of the 30%. And all of you guys know these numbers, way better than I do, actually.
But you're an optimist. I'm hearing optimism.
I am an optimist because I believe if you show people that you're going to do something, the next step, which is a lot harder, and many people in this room understand it, the very, very low-income folks do not have a real shot right now. And if we're going to begin to start talking about change, we have to now start using data, and we have to start using other resources. So people say things like, well, we've got to reduce the cost of construction. We've got to get governmental regulations down. Generally, that we all agree on that. But when we get to the safety and welfare of people for the long term, that's one thing. Then we also have to realize that we can't do this perhaps in one generation. There are many of us that work with families that don't have the opportunity for their kids to go to good schools, for even to parent well because of the income inequities. So we have to get wages up. We have to get wages up. So there's lots of really hard decisions. Actually, I shouldn't say this, I guess, in one way. Building is a lot easier than actually solving the problem because the problem is about people and policies.
Well, I want to go to Representative Adams. I know that you have your, I've been told by your team, the 4 H's. And I think one of the other things that would be a mistake in having this conversation is not looking at the ecosystem. I know 2 of them, health, and schools, I think, but that's not an H. But I know historically black colleges, and then you have a couple of others. But I'm interested in how you look at what needs to be done to sculpt build healthier communities here in this region, and what place housing and affordability plays in that.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you all for coming as well. It's always good to sit in conversation with my mayor.
Do you two like each other?
Oh,
Oh,
absolutely.
God.
yeah,
yes.
good.
Yeah.
That's good. I wasn't, you know,
Hey,
you never
wait,
know.
wait a minute. Wait, I have to
All right,
say
don't
this.
put
No,
that
we're
out.
not
We
going
do,
there
we
because,
do, we
you know, there's this myth that women don't support each other.
Oh, no,
And
I'm
we are not in
yeah,
that myth.
good.
No,
Great.
no.
Yeah, that's fake news. That's
Yeah,
fake
good.
news. So
Yeah.
let me first of all say that housing, healthcare, higher education, and hunger, those are the areas that we tend to work a lot on. Those are my 4 H's, and of course, there are other areas that I think are interrelated there, like transportation, because that's also an issue, I think, for housing as well. But I don't think that we can dismiss, when we talk about affordability for people who need a decent, affordable place to live. First of all, they got to be able to afford it. So that means that they need to have an income. So they've got you get back to needing at least a job with the skill set that you have. So all of those things are interrelated. I don't think that you can, if you need a place to live and you can't afford it, if we had more houses and more units than we needed here, if people don't have the kind of income because they're not making a living wage or wages that would allow them to do it, then that becomes a problem as well. So all those things are interrelated. I mean, not having enough food,
Right.
Not having nutritious food, those are the things that I think impact our communities in the way that really create
I've been
problems.
quite taken with reading your tweets. They're great. One of the tweets that the Congresswoman has is, you don't find the hat finds you. I am. But another tweet you were tweeting about housing is really that it's one of supply and demand. You said that right now the demand is exceeding supply, and I'm interested from your perspective, which is sort of a foot here and a foot in Washington. What can be done in working with the mayor, working with other players to address? Because I know you have a huge housing shortage, and you have a huge housing shortage in particular on the low-income side. But I've seen a lot of cities that address this with plans, and so is there a plan in place to begin looking at building affordable housing?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to do is to be comprehensive in our approach. We have to create partnerships, which the mayor and I, and not just with your local governments, but also with your state government as well, and the federal government. Now, I have the opportunity to sit on financial services and with Auntie Max, as folks call her, Congresswoman Waters, and housing is not only a big concern of our committee, and we've done a lot. For example, we've passed 84 bills out of there that would address issues around discriminatory practices with landlords, allowing tax credits, greater tax credits for folks who are trying to get into housing. Also, income discrimination. We have folks, for example, here in Charlotte who have identified places that they can live, but yet they're not able to get in because the vouchers, for example, that have been provided for them are not accepted. So as the mayor has talked about
These are the HUD vouchers?
Yes. And that's the HUD issue is another problem as well, because when you look at the
That's another conference.
right,
Right.
right. But it does factor in terms of the funds that are available, the home funds, the CBDG funds, all of those things must work in concert with each other. We are looking at a 15% cut right now. At least that's the budget that's come from the administration, which is about $8.6 billion. We can't afford to do that with so many people who are without housing. We're growing. Charlotte is growing tremendously each and every day. So when we talk about supply and demand, you've got more people coming into our communities, and many of those folks are at that level in terms of not being able to afford some of the properties that are being built. So I think the partnerships have to be extended, not only with those who are building, but with our cities, with our state, and also the federal government. We need to put more money into grants funding. We just, there was just a grant issued to a nonprofit
Right.
right here in Charlotte for about I think it was $500,000 for housing for elderly. So we've got categories of people who are still without decent, affordable places to live.
You know, one of the things that struck us, the Hill recently had an event on mayors, and we had 6 mayors from around the United States. We had Miami, we had Kansas City, Seattle, Topeka, Kansas, and others. And this problem of home affordability is something that they're all dealing with. And there are different dimensions of it, right? There's the homelessness problem, which is, I was talking to a number of folks in the audience today, and that has a whole range of issues. Then the other side is just about cost and affordability. One of the things that came up a lot in talking to Miami and Seattle was, and also when we were in Minneapolis, is trying to shake up the way financing happens, intergenerational finance, within families. But part of that is getting institutions to look at people differently. A lot of institutions sort of look at them as risks. You know, how high is the risk? And I think in this age where we're looking at a whole lot of biases and assumptions built into how we have looked at this, and there's this new term of second chance economy, do you think we need to rewrite the rules of how we look at risk, whether we need to kind of look at new models of financing to try to sort of shake up communities in a different way? Mayor?
Well, the answer is yes. And we're beginning to do some of that. In Charlotte, we have we work with LIS as one of our housing financing partners. And all of our financial institutions in this community, in addition to the financial institutions, but people have supported and provided money for what we call a choice home fund. And so we are beginning to address that. So if you think about it, and it is about the math. It's, you know, if we want to build a unit, how much do we have to subsidize the construction to ensure affordability for people? And it varies, and it's just how many can you do at under 30, how many under 60, and how many under 80. That's our target field. And so we have to have enough money available in each of these pools to do that. So we have our bond money, which is something that we really have committed to, $50 million. It'll be on the ballot this year, again, this fall, so remember that. And then we will have the federal funds that we have for home ownership and rentals and development of rehabbing and all of that. And then we have the funds that the Foundation for the Carolinas has really put in place and been supported by most, as I say, almost every financial institution. And we're lending money at different rates than what we did in the past. And that makes a huge difference because we have choices on how to build a tranche, as you call it, or stack. Yeah, I'm not the banker in the room, but so how do we stack all of this financing together to get the highest amount of use from capital available in the marketplace so that we can use our bond funding as last resort? But I want to say that we are also, I think, very conscious about cost, and now we're at the phase that we're talking about how do we get our costs down? What do we do? Sometimes you have to ask yourself, what did we do before you start asking other people what they will do? And so we need to look at governmental-owned land. We need to look at governmental regulations. A good friend of mine in this room today would ask me whether the utility line has to be on the right or the left side of the street. And, you know, is there a reason? Sometimes we just do things because they've always been done that way. And it is time for every mayor, every citizen in this community to help us think about what's the best way to do it that addresses both equity and financing so that we can do things. Our county commission has just begun to look at land and availability, and we're going to be working with them to invest through the trust fund, new housing on land that the chairman, who's here today, is talking about, well, we no longer need for the way that we deliver governmental services. So if we no longer need some things for service that we've always been doing, we need to approach it from the way that the Congresswoman talks about. How do we make sure our families are healthy? How do we make sure that they have food? How do they have shelter? And so then, if you can do those three things, I think you can get your kids in a better spot to be educated.
Councilwoman, I want to get a couple of questions from the audience, and I know you want to comment here, but I also want to ask you to, before I go to them, I know you have been worried about opportunity zones, and you've sort of looked at the need to reform the way opportunity zones, which has brought in a lot of money into cities, but there's been criticism that it has gone to areas that aren't solving these public goods problems, particularly for low-income people and people in need. So I'm just interested in a snapshot of your thinking on what we need to do on opportunity zones and what are the prospects of that legislation getting through.
Well, as you know, know, moving legislation can be a long process. I was fortunate to get the Future Act passed pretty quickly.
The
but
Future Act for folks is really a $2.5 billion over 10 years for historical.
$255 million
a year.
Annually, permanent funding.
Your staff member said, but say $2.5 billion over 10 years. So
well,
yeah,
yeah,
no,
but it's permanent funding,
Exactly.
and
That's
that's
great.
one of the things for historically black colleges and universities, and also MSIs. But what I was going to say is that I'm trying to remember what your question was.
well, I'm asking about opportunity zones.
Oh, okay. But so to me, the opportunity zones are designed for opportunities for those who really need them. And I would hope that as we look at creating various things in our community, making sure that we develop those areas, that housing could be included as well, that we take a look at that, trying to make sure that there are some affordable places for people to live. But I just didn't want, and I don't want to see the intent of those opportunity zones misused in a way that the folks who really don't need that tax credit, et cetera, to be able to use it. But let me just mention one other thing. I served 7 years on the Greensboro City Council, did a lot of my work in Guilford County, and housing was always an issue for me because there was a lot of blight in the community in the district that I served. But so therefore, there were people who needed places to live and they didn't have them. I propose a cent for housing, 1 penny out of every tax dollar. Now, I'm not asking to raise taxes, Madam Mayor, but I'm just saying that, and what it did, it created a pot of money that nonprofit organizations and other organizations who were actually going to do partnerships with the city, with the state, to really bring more affordable housing into the community, and it worked pretty well. It's like putting a penny in a piggy.
I mean, I think one of the challenges, I'm going to go to all of you have a friend here who was telling me about really the 08-09 financial crisis and how it hit a lot of folks, and then trying to work your way through the bureaucracy. Part of the question is, how do you get everybody aligned in a way so that building the housing you need at the income level you need becomes an easy process, not a hard one, so that government and nonprofits and others aren't having to create an industry to sort of solve that problem. I think alignment of incentives is one of the big challenges, right?
Yeah, it is. But I think in terms of attitude, one of the things that I did was to put a constitutional amendment together. Now, we're hoping we'll get it through. But what it does, it indicates that we would put wording into our Constitution that housing, that housing and nutrition, health care, that those things are absolute fundamental rights that everybody desires. And I think if we come together as a community, as a state, as a nation, believing that these are things that each and every person, that each and every family needs, and I think if we can get on that page to begin this process, that may be helpful.
Let me get at least one or two questions in here real quick. Yes, sir, right here in the front. We've got a microphone.
I don't need one.
No, yes, we have a camera watching every word you're saying.
Vi, two items. One's a comment, one's a question. I think you've undersold the efforts you're making in trying to create public-private partnerships to solve this problem. You're doing a lot of things outside the box that you haven't discussed and may not discuss today, but I applaud you for that.
Thanks.
So having said that, there are a number of statistics that support the fact that not everyone is cut out for home ownership.
Right.
There's a greater number of statistics that support the fact that you reduce peripheral costs like truancy, crime, domestic violence, you improve education through home ownership. So the question is, how do you go about determining, other than using the AMI indexes, how do you go about determining who can own and who can rent and who will you not subsidize but invest in so that we can start this upward mobility for some of those people?
Great question.
So AMI has been used for so long, it's the federal standard. And so we all have to comply with the federal rules. That's just kind of like the practice that we have in the policy that we have to follow right now. But you're right, the world is changing. There are people that do not see home ownership as a plus. There are people that are always concerned about the idea of maintenance and all of those things that come with home ownership, which is a bigger hurdle right now. I heard an economist speak recently about the number of homes that are available in this country for resale have been pretty stable just because it's cheaper, because you can stay in your home at a lower interest rate, and the rental market is growing. And so when we start talking about change, AMI is no longer enough for us to consider. And when we look at programs, we actually need to look at what people are wanting and a need. The demographics are changing. We are the #1 relocation spot for millennials in the country. So when millennials are moving here, they are not necessarily wanting to be a homeowner. The question is, we also have seniors that are saying, I've got this home, and where do I go? And I begin to age and think about, well, I want a smaller place. There's got to be a change in analysis, not just on AMI, but it's about land use, and it's about zoning, and it's about those things of how are we going to build a city that accommodates all of the demographic changes that we're experiencing in a high growth like Charlotte. I believe that we can step out and do this because we are at a place in our policy and collaboration, our public-private partnerships, everybody's focused on doing it right.
Let me give the representative the last word on this issue of how to get the equilibrium right between those who might be on a great track to home ownership if they could just get some of the hurdles out of the way, and those for whom it's not a good track. Is there a way you look at the policy frame of looking at that?
Well, I think you have to have a multidimensional approach, and there are different strokes for different folks.
Right.
And so teaching people how to be homeowners, helping them get their financial situation secure and stable. And Mayor's absolutely right. Many of the young folks, because particularly in the area that I live in, there are apartments everywhere, and I think they don't come into this as they begin their careers actually wanting to buy a home, and they may never want to do that. But I think you have to be prepared, knowing financially what you need to do to make sure that you're able to, whether it is you're going to buy a home or whether you're going to rent. But you have to be able to afford it. And so I think we have a number of programs that really help people in terms of counseling, getting them prepared and ready. When I got my first home many, many years ago, first of all, I was a student. I was a married student at North Carolina A&T, and couldn't find a place to live, and bought a little mobile home. That was my first. That was my first home, and then we went on and did some other things. But still, you even have to be prepared. Well, if your rent is $500, which I don't think you can rent for that.
No, not in
But the
this
point
city.
is, whatever it is, however low it is, however high it is, whatever it is in between, even your mortgage, I think that you have to. When I was growing up, my grandmother used to say, you don't want to you won't want to live be ahead of your means. You want to stay within within that and what you can afford. So I think we can teach people how to be homeowners, the things that get them prepared for what they need to do, get their credit right, and all those kinds of things. So.
Well, I want to thank you both for your work on this important subject and sharing with us your time this morning in this conversation. Thank you so much, Mayor Vi Lyles, Representative
Thank you,
Alma
guys.
Adams.